So welcome to Bridgman Week 2. We're going to be getting into the musculature this week. And for that, I'm going to go over the pages here that I'd like to see you using. So again, in this edition, page 176, that's a really great page. (178) is a really good one, and that's similar to what I'll be doing for this week's demo. Also over on this side, 179, that's a really good page as well. It shows a lot of different actions of the arm, which is always good to commit to memory, showing how Bridgman wedges the forms together from various different angles. I might do one off of that page as well. This is a really good one because it actually shows where the muscles attach up inside of the shoulder joint. This is the one that I'll actually be drawing here on the posterior view of the arm or dorsal view of the arm. In fact, both those pages. So 182 and 183. And these might not be the same numbers in the edition that you have, same pages and page numbers in the edition that you have. That's a slightly more diagrammatic page, but it's also really good at showing a lot of the different, again, muscular attachments, which is really good. And I think that might be... I have one more. And then also on this, but actually both these pages are really good. Again, showing some more of the muscular attachment. So those are the main pages that you'll be going off of for this week's homework. Go back through it a little bit more slowly. So those two pages. That page. Both of those pages. That page. Both of those pages. And that page. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go over a couple of more diagrammatic drawings again this week to kind of go over generally where, how to handle those as well. So, actually, let's go back to this one. So again, I start with these kind of simple wedges that Bridgman is so fond of. Here we got the ulna coming down, radius on the far side, down to the olecranon. the upper arm. Then we've got the deltoid. And the trapezius coming around a little bit here. We can probably zoom in on just this arm that I'm drawing here. Then we've got the pec coming down. Again, I'm not going to get too much into that pec because that we'll be addressing that more as we get into the torso. Got the lat coming down. And then what I'm really focusing on here is looking for where these muscles attach. So we've got the bicep, which is coming up here and attaching to part of the shoulder blade, called the coracoid process. The bicep actually splits into two separate heads, hence bicep. That's basically what bicep means. And so it will split, one insertion coming up over the humerus to the top of the glenoid cavity, and then the other coming in and attaching to the coracoid process. But basically they just attach up into the shoulder. Again, I don't want to get it too much into the origin of insertion. The more important thing to learn is that the bicep comes around, bulges through the middle, and attaches down onto the forearm. Then we've got the deltoid, that runs from all around the shoulder girdle. It actually attaches to the bottom of the spine of the scapula and then onto the collarbone as well. So pretty much all around that shoulder girdle, and then down onto the lateral portion of the arm between the tricep and the bicep, so around to the other side. So it's basically looping around like so. So getting this bicep to insert right up in there. So basically you've got your bicep and then that deltoid is going to attach over onto the other side. So getting those to lock together in that fashion is a very bridgman concept. And then we've got the brachiobrachialis, which is a little wedge-shaped looking muscle in the armpit. I just call it the armpit muscle because it's pretty much the only muscle that shows up in the armpit. I mean, by its very name, the armpit is a pit, so it's a hole. And there's basically one muscle that you'll see in there. And it's a little triangular wedge-shaped muscle called the brachiobrachialis. The latissimus will come up right behind that. And then you'll have the tricep come in and attach, comes again from basically the back of the arm and the glenoid cavity and attaches down onto the elbow. Then through here you have a muscle, a deep muscle called the brachialis antiquatus, and one of the heads of the tricep coming down to fill in that gap. And then here we'll have the flexor group of the forearm muscles. They ride along the underside of the forearm, and they'll also kind of come down and lock around the bicep. So that's what will lock all that area together. And then here we've got the ulna. Actually, that should thin out a little bit more. And then the radius. And then we've got the extensor group that runs along the back of the forearm. And that's really what these more diagrammatic drawings are about, is showing you kind of where these elements attach. But what I would encourage you to really look at are the ways in which they wedge together. So you've got this deltoid wrapping around and locking around the bicep, the big form of the bicep, coming down to the forearm, the flexor muscles locking around that bicep. The strength and straightness of the ulna. The extensor muscles. The tricep, and paying particular attention to the way in which they overlap. So bicep, brachiobrachialis, or armpit muscle, large wing muscle, latissimus, and then tricep. So looking at the way that these sort of braid into one another and lock together. And then making a mental note of, on Bridgman's drawings, where he has little squiggle lines. So learning to interpret his drawings. So when I look at this, I see these little squiggle lines that are running along here, and I interpret that as a form shadow. I see this harder line there, and I'm going to interpret that as sort of a hard edge or a cast shadow. We got another little squiggle line here. Another squiggle line. And we sort of start to fill in that shadow pattern. And there's a lot of interpretation that goes on here. It's not like it's completely, obvious exactly what he's doing. But that's part of what I'm doing here. It's that detective work that really gets me to learn exactly what he's doing. And then when I cross-reference that with what we'll be doing next week, which are those sort of bodybuilder drawings or muscular model drawings, then we sort of start to commit that to memory. Not sort of, we do. We start to commit that to memory. So as I'm doing these drawings, I'm interpreting this and then I'll draw from a more ideal model type, like a very muscular model, like our model Yoni, who we'll be drawing from. And I look for these same shapes in him. And I start to sort of morph his shapes into these shapes to a certain degree, and then vice versa when I come back to these, because this isn't something that you do just once and you know it. I've done these drawings, I probably don't even want to know how many times I've done these drawings. A lot. And then exactly how far I want to take these, I don't know. It all just kind of depends. Again, these looser, more diagrammatic drawings, I don't know how far I really want to take them, but it's a fun little exercise. At a certain point, it almost becomes more like figure invention. I don't want to get into too much of that right now, because it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. But once we've gotten through one pass of this, once we've gotten through the arms, maybe I'll do a little bit more of that with the legs, and you'll get kind of where I'm coming from with some of this stuff a little bit more. So that would be an example of what I might do with a drawing, more like that. And then I'll go beyond that to this page here. And basically now I'm going to do a more muscular bridgman arm right next to the skeleton here. So let's go ahead and zoom back out and get the full page. So now basically this will be the muscular version of that skeleton drawing. Start with just the big rhythms here, looking for that big framework. And now I go from this drawing and start basically layering those muscles right into where Bridgman said they would go. So here I've got the framework, which I studied last week. And now we start coming in, we can look for where certain elements of the skeleton comes to the surface as well. So for instance, here we've got the olecranon, and that's coming to the surface here. So this shape is this shape. So this is one of the areas where this starts to become really handy, is we start seeing that corollary. Okay, well that shape is this shape. This shape is right here. It's called the supracondylar ridge. Supra means above. Well, this is the condyle, and this is the ridge above the condyle, so it's the supracondylar ridge. And that's where the brachioradialis originates at, which we can see right here. Here we've got the humerus coming up. That medial head of the tricep is riding pretty much right on top of that, and so it's coming up here. Bridgman has been nice enough to actually, in the diagram, show the head of the humerus. So again, it's almost like doing a little écorché or anatomical sculpture, but in drawing. So we can start to correlate these two and understanding where the two things come together. We've got the deltoid coming down, and again inserting onto the humerus. We've got the lateral aspect. We saw the medial aspect on the last drawing, but now we've got the lateral aspect of the brachialis antiquotus. Here's the bicep coming down, heading down onto the forearm, and being obscured by the ridge muscles, the brachioradialis. The ridge muscles are made up of the brachioradialis and the extensor carpi radialis longus. So normally those will be sort of presented as one large mass that runs from the lateral condyle and the supracondylar ridge down on the inside of the wrist. Right next to that, we've got the lateral epicondyle, and that is going to be, so that's right here, lateral epicondyle, and that will be the origin of the extensor muscles that we talked about. Again, there's 3 of them, but I'm not going to get into all that, just the extensor group, that's good enough. So it's a big wedge that comes in here and covers up most of the outside of the forearm. Down here we have the extensor carpi radialis brevis and the pollicis muscles. Here we've got the anconeus, little triangular shaped muscle that sits on the elbow, helps stabilize and extend the elbow. And then here we can see the ulna coming down. The ulna is very palpable, you can feel it. It's right underneath the surface. And then we've got a little bit of the flexor muscles peeking around from the other side. Here we've got the 3 heads of the tricep. The lateral head originating from the humerus underneath the deltoid. The very large muscle. All 3 heads together make a very large muscle. Then we've got the long head that rides from the elbow all the way up onto the glenoid cavity. And underneath all of that, we have the medial head. So the medial head just shows through a little bit here, but mostly it rides underneath the tricep. And the gap in between the long head and the lateral head creates that distinctive horseshoe shape. And then again, that deltoid will actually ride over the top of that. So now we've got that big overall framework of that arm. Now breaking down the lighting, I'm looking at it and I see a form shadow here on the deltoid. So that tells me my light source is coming from somewhere over here. Well, I know that means, even though he doesn't have it designated that way, I know that that means the bicep would have some shadow on it. I do see here on the tricep just a little sliver of shadow. I see a little shadow here on the horseshoe of the tricep. Maybe I'll put a little halftone separating the bicep from the brachialis antiquotus. We've got the brachioradialis coming down. A little separation between the brachioradialis and the extensor carpi radialis longus, but mainly treating that as one big mass, as the ridge muscles. The extensor group has a shadow on it. It looks like he's got a little bit of light hitting on the pollicis muscles. Maybe a little bit of shadow on the olecranon. And the anconius. And there's my shadow mapping. So now I can come in here and start to fill that in. And establish my big two-value effect that I personally feel is important to any good drawing. Just come in and separate out what's lit from what's not lit. So there's my big light and dark effect. And it's forcing me to really think about what it is that I'm looking at, to understand that form so that I can light it properly. Now I've gotten a lot from what I see that he's sort of indicated there, and basically what I'm doing is translating. I'm going, okay, I'm pretty sure that's what he means by a core shadow. So on these, he's got sort of a continuous line, those are core shadows. He's got these little diagonal lines. Well, I'm taking that to be as reflected light or fill light. That's my shadow, basically. And then he has these little sort of line indications in places like this, and I'm taking that to be halftone. So now using that as sort of my Rosetta Stone to translate his drawings into something tonal, now I'm going to go in and extrapolate on that, and again use a little bit of my knowledge from having done drawings of fit muscular models before, again from my previous passes of doing this exercise. And I'm going to extrapolate on that and start to render this out a little bit more. So softening that edge along the bicep. I know that that's a fairly rounded form. I know that if this is in shadow and this is in light, there must be some kind of a cast shadow. So I'm going to make that more of a hard edge. Again, this deltoid is a very rounded muscle. I'm going to add in some halftone there to round that out. So I'm taking what I know for sure on his drawings, and then I'm using that to extrapolate what I think or what I'm not so sure about to understand these forms a little bit and basically try to make his drawing look like a real person or, real-ish. Injecting some things that I've seen on models before that maybe I'm not seeing here. Injecting some halftones where I see that he's got some delineation. And starting to build these forms up. Guessing at where I think a highlight might be, for instance. So if my light source is coming from here, well, I'm thinking that there is probably a highlight running right along the peak of that muscle. And so I am going to build up these halftones around that highlight. I can see in the reference that it looks like he had some cross-hatching lines along here. So then hopefully what I start getting is rounding of the form, rounding of the form, rounding of the form by how I build up each of those planes. So if a muscle isn't pronounced enough or lit in such a way that it's going to create a full shadow, well, then I come in with halftone to separate that out. So separating out the brachialis antiquus from the bicep. Separating out the individual heads of the tricep, for instance. So again, I'm trying to inject some of what I know. So I'm starting out by drawing what he's showing me and then trying to inject some of what I know into it to help clarify that and see exactly what I know. How clear are those areas in my mind? How well do I understand them? I want to push that deltoid in on top of the tricep a little bit more. Pushing those overlaps to show that deltoid coming in front of the bicep, the deltoid coming in front of the bicep, the brachioradialis coming in front of the bicep. The extensor carpi radialis longus coming in front of the brachioradialis slightly. I mean, they're more or less grouped together, so this is a little stronger overlap than this is. This is a little stronger overlap than that, but not as strong as that. And again, people, sometimes people say, it's like, well, how do you know that? Well, you know it because I just told you. That's how I learned it. Jeff doing the same thing for me. But also, and I also know it from doing my other drawings as well. So as I do this, I kind of try to commit it to memory. That's what studying this anatomy is really about, is trying to commit as much of it to memory as I can. And from a practical standpoint too, not just, that's why, learning the names and everything, it's great. It's a good thing to do, but this is more important. Committing this stuff to visual memory is way more important. So that I remember these shapes and this wedging and the overlap that Bridgman is creating in his drawings, so that when I go and look at the model, which we will do next week, I can bring that into my drawings of the model, and vice versa. When I look at the model, I try to look at what those shapes actually look like in real life, and then I can come back into this and inject them back into this drawing as well. So again, it's a back and forth. I'm letting nature influence my more stylized drawings, and I'm letting my more stylized drawings influence nature. So when I think something looks cool here, I go, oh, that looks better than how I normally see it on the model. It reads more clearly. It just looks better. It communicates better. And I take that and inject it into reality. And then I take reality and inject that back into this. So again, it's this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth of letting reality influence my imagination, letting my imagination influence reality. And it's something that Bridgman was really, really good at. It was something that was really key to his teaching, is learning how to design these things into ideas. So a muscle isn't just a thing to be studied like a doctor. It's a tool to interpret your drawings and get them to read better. If I can get this deltoid to wrap around that tricep, well, that's going to help the volume of the tricep. Am I ever going to see that on the model? Maybe, probably not. Probably not. That's what the deltoid does, but does it actually look that way? Not usually. Sometimes. But the way that all this wedges together, the way that that deltoid wedges down here and inserts in between the bicep and the tricep, the way that the bicep comes down here and inserts behind the ridge muscles, the way the ridge muscles come in and wrap around the forearm, those are things that once you know them, you can't help but see them, but if you don't know it, you're never going to see it, because it just doesn't look like that in reality. Again, not very often. Yoni, who's going to be the reference model for this class, he's about as close as you're going to get. I mean, he's like a walking Bridgman drawing. So it's a great sort of transition or segue from Bridgman into your sort of everyday average model. If you can learn to spot them first on a model like Yoni, you're going to have a much better chance of spotting those shapes on other models in the long run, or in your imagination. If you want to draw out of your imagination, if your goal is to be, a concept designer or a comic artist or even an illustrator, there's a fair amount of, even when you're working from reference, there's a fair amount of invention there. That's why it's model reference. Photo reference. It's not photocopying, it's photo reference. And so I'm using all of this knowledge that I'm gaining from these studies to hopefully improve on my photo reference. And then I let the photo reference guide the real world aspect, the authenticity of my drawing. It injects a bit of reality that I could probably never really invent, completely realistic drawings out of my imagination. There's just too many factors involved. But at the same time, just copying what you see up in front of you, it doesn't always make the clearest drawing because it's reality. It's not really taking into account that this needs to be flattened out and for it to read three-dimensional on a two-dimensional sheet of paper. So again, it's that back and forth. It's that interpretation of what I want to read in a drawing and the reference material that I have in front of me, and finding a nice sort of synthesis of the two to create the ideal version. So you can see I've taken that Bridgman drawing and tried to make it look more like a real arm. My goal is to one day be able to do these drawings and you won't be able to tell which ones were done from my Bridgman drawings and which ones were done from model reference. That's where I'd like to get to at some point, where they're literally indistinguishable from one another. And then maybe at that point, maybe I won't need reference. I'll probably still shoot it because I like having photo reference, but sometimes it's like a comfort blanket. It's just nice having it there. All right, so I'll probably go ahead and call that done. Although I'd love to keep working on it, but that's already 45 minutes in. So that's basically how I'd like to see you approach that drawing. So as many of those pages as I outlined out for you, you can take them to more of a finish like that if you feel like it's fitting. Or if you want to keep them a little bit simpler like the one before this, you do that. So basically the ones that are a little bit more diagrammatic, keep them a little bit simpler. The ones that are a little bit more finished and refined, you'll take them to this level and get as many of them done as you feel comfortable doing. Again, try to get them right. Do the best job you can on them. If you only get 2 or 3 drawings and that's the best you could do, that's fine. I would rather see you do the best job that you can do rather than race to get more done. When the class is over, you can always go back and revisit this exercise and take your time on it all together. Right now it's getting a comfort level, learning how to interpret his drawings so that you can study from them in a more cognitive way so that you actually understand what he's drawing. You don't just look at it and go, yeah, the drawings look cool, but I don't know what's going on. So hopefully now you've got a little bit better idea of what's going on in his drawings. That's going to be it for this week. Go through those pages that I recommended to you. Start with the ones that sort of make the most sense to you and work out from there. Next week we'll be getting into the muscular model reference and looking at what a real arm looks like in basically the same pose and going from there. And then we'll start in on legs, torso, so on from there. So that's going to be it for this week. Hopefully you learned a thing or two, and I look forward to seeing your submissions.